So, looking at our schedule, again, this is week 10. We're covering week 9 material, which is all of our main feeder stuff. So we're going to be talking about wire sizing, breaker sizing, and doing some drawings today. So everything that you're going to need is your Excel notebook. You're going to need your shop drawing. You're going to need your code book, your calculator. Have something to take some notes with. There's going to be a couple of times I reference just a couple of things off the bulletin book, but we're not using that for any material, so if you want to pull that up, you can, but it's just for a reference. So, just to kind of give an idea of what I'm referring to, So far, in our shop at least, we have all of our MCCs. Of course, I didn't draw all of them, I just kind of drew a handful up here. But we have our MCCs, and then over here, what's feeding our office, we have this office transformer that we sized a few weeks back. And of course, that's feeding our panels, and then of course, ultimately also this air conditioner that's fed out of here, right? So we have all of our office load. So up until this point, we have all the calculations for all of these branch circuits. So meaning all of the motors that are being fed out of these MCCs. As far as coming over here in our office, same thing. We kind of got like all of our receptacles fed, all of our lights fed, right? We have all of this already sized, but the question, what we're going to solve today is what's feeding all of this equipment? What's feeding all of our MCCs? What's feeding this office transformer? That's where this main distribution panel that I briefly talked about last week comes into play. This is kind of our central supply. This is where all of our main feeders are coming in at. So they're going to feed all of our MCCs. And they're also going to have one comes over here and feeds our office transformer. So that's getting the wire there, so from point A to point B. The other half of that equation is we are also going to have to solve for the breaker sizes for each one of these circuits. So that's our two main focuses for today, sizing these wires and these breakers. So just to kind of give you an idea of kind of how this is laid out. And also too, in the bulletin book, so if you recall, at the beginning we kind of looked at this sheet quite a bit, right? We looked at all those steps, and at this point we've done steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then some. But now, this week, we're going to cover both steps 5 and step 6. So step 5 is always talking about your conductor, so we want to size our wire first, then we size the breaker here. But if we're looking at step 5, it's going to direct us to Article 430.24. So let's go ahead and open up our code books and go there. For me, that's on page 345. You said 430.24? Yep. So again, before we kind of read this code reference here, if you kind of scroll up in the text a few columns, and you get to the very top of page 344 in the top left-hand corner, it says Part 2. So again, what is the title of Part 2?
circuit conductors.
Very good. So, if you recall, here a few weeks ago, when we were talking about our power circuits, we looked at this exact same page. Matter of fact, we even already looked at 430.24 when we sized our wires for our M5 and M6s. So, this part 2, again, kind of going back a couple of weeks, this is not a specific subsection of Article 430. It is not specific to just branch circuits or feeder circuits. It's motor circuit conductor. So if there's a motor on this circuit in any form or fashion, then it kind of applies here. So, since we are dealing with our feeders, they have multiple motors, right? We have multiple machines coming out of these MCCs, and ultimately that's what this feeder is feeding, this MCC. So, we're not looking at 430.22 because we don't have just one motor. So 430.24 is talking about those several motors or a motor with other loads. So it states conductors supplying several motors or a motor and other loads shall have an ampacity of not less than the sum of the following. So we're gonna have to kind of keep that in mind, not less than the sum of the following. So we're gonna have to add up whatever it tells us here. So step 1, it says 125% of our largest rated motor. So again, anytime the code book says largest rated motor, it's always talking about in terms of FLA, never horsepower. So we're first going to look at this first MCC, and we're going to look at all of our motors on here, and we're going to say, all right, which one draws the most FLA? Which one has the highest FLA? Whichever one that is, we're going to upsize by 125%. Step 2 says we got to take the sum of all the other FLAs in this MCC. So they're still all going to be drawing current, and that's something that we need to factor into on that main feeder wire. Sum of all other FLAs. Step 3 says 100% of our non-continuous non-motor load. So when we were talking about our power circuits and looking at this code reference, we actually didn't use step 3 because our M5s and M6s didn't have non-motor loads. But again, now we're talking about this main feeder that's feeding this MCC. Well, do we have non-continuous non-motor loads in our MCCs?
The lights?
Not the lights.
Receptacles.
Receptacles, there you go. So all of our MCCs have those receptacles. So it's telling us that we need to take 100%, we can kind of translate that to our some layman terms for our project, but we need to take 100% of our shop receptacle panels. And then step 4, that was also something we omitted when we were doing our branch circuits, our power circuits. But it says we need to take 125% of our continuous non-motor load. Well, what's our continuous non-motor load in only one MCC?
That's our lights.
That is our lights. So step 4 is only going to be applicable only to one MCC, whichever one has our shop lighting panel. So we're going to take 125% of that. Again, that's only going to be applicable for one MCC. So that's all of our steps there for the code. But if you remember, before we started reading those steps, it said, hey, these 4 steps here, whatever they are, you have to total them up. So we're going to add all of these steps together, and whatever this grand total is, we can just call that, we'll just say that's our total answer. technically per the code, that's what we would size our feeder wire to. However, we're gonna take it just a step further than that. So, if we were to size our feeder wire to that, technically there's nothing wrong with that, per the code. However, not all of our MCCs are just completely full, right? Most of y'all probably have some spares in here. So, just being good technicians that we are, we're gonna kind of prepare for the future a little bit. Let's say I had a couple of spares in this MCC1, and we finally get up and running, and I'm like, you know what, I could throw another M1 machine in there and kind of help increase production in my shop, right? So I buy another M1. I go to install it in this MCC1. Well, at that point, I would have to redo my feeder calculation, and I would potentially have to change this line out just to install one machine. So that's a lot of work involved with that. So to kind of help prevent stuff like that, we're gonna add what's called a growth factor to it. So once we total up these amps, yes, this is everything that the code tells us to do, but again, for our project, we're gonna kind of take it a step further. We're gonna take this total amps, and we're gonna multiply it by a 130% growth factor. So, like I said, in the event we ever come back in the future, add another machine, we hopefully don't have to change out this main feeder conductor. So that 130% growth factor, that's going to be the same value for everybody. We're all going to have that 130% growth factor. And then that will give us the required ampacity that we need to size this line for. Okay. Does anybody have any questions over the code and the steps involved in that process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so in your notebook, if you go probably a quarter of the way through it, you'll come across a main feeder wire sizing cover page. The page directly after that is completely blank. So, is everybody good with my chicken scratch up here? Everybody's got good notes on that? Going once? Okay. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. However, I'm going to show you the way that I would recommend that you kind of set up these blank pages here. And we'll kind of do an example too, so that way you can see how it all works. So, again, this is what I would recommend that you kind of set this page up for, all of these columns here. So, starting over here on the left, we have an equipment ID. So we have to list out all the equipment that is inside of this MCC. That is going to be all of our load. So, yes, we're going to list machines and some other stuff, but again, this is all really for the MCC. The MCC is just basically an industrial sized breaker panel. So it just consolidates and houses all of these machines in kind of one central location. It keeps everything organized for us. But we're gonna have to list out our load basically inside of that MCC because that's what our main feeder is supplying. Then we're gonna have to list how many of those machines we have. Of course, we'll have X, Y, rise and fall, total footage, and then we kind of get into some of our load calculations here, voltage drop stuff, and then selecting our wire size. So, for this example, let's just say this is like MCC1 here. And who in here has fabrication? Nobody?
No, I think I do.
2 people, 3 people? Okay, so the reason I'm asking is because I'm gonna kind of do more of a production style setup for my fabrication guys. So it might not, yours is definitely not gonna look the same, but it's gonna be the exact same process, okay? Just because I don't have enough room and also it's a lot more work for me to do fabrication, because guess what? For your fabrication guys, in MCC1, you should have in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, you should have all 12 of your machines in here. So like I said, I'm not sure if I'd have the room and all of that. It's a lot more writing for me to do. So don't freak out over that. It's the exact same process. Yours is just gonna have more kind of line items. Okay. But like I said, I'm gonna kind of more mimic more of a production style setup. But let's say we have some M1s and some M2s in here. We also have our receptacles, right? So I need to include my shop receptacle panel. And since this is an MCC1, we'll just call it shop receptacle panel 1. And then just to incorporate the step 4, again, the step 4 here for our shop lighting panel, that's only for one MCC. So I'm just gonna say for this example purpose, let's say my shop lighting panel's also in this MCC. So, if you need to, you can open up your elevation drawing and you can cross-reference all the equipment that you have in there. Yeah.
I have a question. So if you had, let's say you had multiple M1 motors, let's say because you did fabrication, could you just do like maybe M1 comma and then the total number of M1s you have?
No, that's kind of leading into our second column here, our quantity, right? So we're just listing out all our machines. So this, like I said, is kind of representing more of a production style setup because I only have M1s and M2s in here. For my folks with fabrication, you're gonna have M1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 12 listed there, and then your shop receptacle panel, and then potentially one of those shop lighting panels in one of those MCCs, wherever yours is at.
Is this including, like, once you go through the M1 through 12, is this including the rest that you put into the spaces that you have as well, that you put in the equipment ID?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, it's including everything. So
Everything.
at this point in time, we're not too focused on like M1-1, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we are, but we're not, right?
Okay.
We're just listing M1,
I
right?
see.
So if this is more of a production style setup, I should have all of my M1s and M2s in there, right?
Mhm.
So for example, for my quantity, I'm just making up some numbers here, but let's just say I had 10 M1s in here and then I had 8 M2s. Right? So that's kind of more representing at that production style setup. I have multiple quantities of those few machines in that MCC. For fabrication, again, like so you're gonna have M1 through M12, but for your quantities, they're mostly just gonna be like 1s and 2s,
Yeah.
maybe a 3, right? You're just gonna have 1 and 2 in here for the most part.
Yeah.
Will MCC2 and MCC1 be on the same page, or will you make a copy of it for MCC2?
You should have a page for each MCC. So in total, we're gonna have 7 main feeder wire sizing pages. Alright, so we got our machine quantities. Of course, we'll fill in our panel quantities. So we only have one shop receptacle panel and we only have one shop lighting panel. For the X, Y, and rise and fall and total footage, I'm gonna show you how to get those distances at the drawing. The drawing's gonna be the last thing we talk about today, but for this example, I'm just gonna make up some numbers. So I'm also gonna draw these little boxes here. So what I'm representing by this box is this X distance, that's the same for all this equipment listed here, right? Because again, we're listing equipment here, but this is really just for the MCC, right? So these are all gonna share the same distances, because on that little drawing that I had over here from the MDP to MCC1, it's the same, it's gonna be the same. We're just listing out our load inside of that MCC. So when I draw this box, it's almost like that merge and center on Excel. That's kind of what that's representing. You can just kind of merge and center. That's what these boxes kind of represent. But let's just say for my X distance, let's just say I got 50 foot. Again, I'm just making up numbers. I'll show you how to get those here in a second. Another box for Y. Rise and fall. This one, everybody will have this value. So I'll kind of put a star in here. But our rise and fall for the main feeders is 40 foot. That's our rise and fall. So that's going to be the same rise and fall for everybody. And then of course we have our total footage. That's just adding up the X, Y, and rise and fall. So looking here in this example, I got 50, another 50, that's 100, and then our rise and fall of 40, so that brings the total to 140 feet. And again, those boxes, that's kind of representing, like I said, that merge and center. So all of your line items here, whatever you list in your equipment ID and stuff, those line items, they're all gonna share those same values.
They're all in the same MCC, right?
Correct, yeah, because yes, we are listing out the equipment, but we're more focused on the MCC. This is just kind of what's in the MCC so we can appropriately size the wire. Yeah, so they're all gonna share that same distance.
And you're about to show us how to get the X and Y, right? Okay.
I'll show you at the very end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the drawing is pretty straightforward, so that'll be the last thing that we talk about, because we gotta talk about all the logistics on how to calculate all this stuff first. Yeah, but like I said, I'll show you all how to do that at the end. For our FLA, so I'm just gonna make up some stuff here, but you don't have to include this portion, but I'm just gonna put over here in parentheses, let's say our M1 was a 10 horsepower, and let's say our M2, that was 5 horsepower. So the FLA on a 10 horsepower motor is 14 amps, and for a 5 horsepower motor, I believe, that should be 7.6 amps. Double check that real quick.
But we can just pull that somewhere.
Design number.
Yes, so you should have already that information,
Yeah.
right? And if you need to, you can also come to this page,
Yeah.
right? So again, this is kind of that central hub of all your information for your machine. So you might also want to be cross-referencing this page as well, your machine and motor schedule, because it has a lot of this information on there already. I just kind of have to find some of the stuff for the example. But you're going to list out your FLA for all of your machines. So this is table listed stuff that you already have available to you. But for our panels though, so since we're calling this column FLA, well, what piece of equipment in your education out here has the term FLA associated with it? A motor, right? And that's it. We don't ever say like, oh, well, this breaker here has an FLA, or this panel over here is rated for how many FLA, right? We don't say that, right? That's not normal terminology for it. So the terminology for an FLA is kind of strictly to a motor. So when we look at our shop receptacle panel and even our shop lighting panel, do they have an FLA?
No.
No. So for those, for my 2 panels here, I'm gonna include NA. It's not applicable for it. We'll calculate their loads here in a second. All right. So I'm just gonna take a quick pause real quick. Is everybody tracking so far?
Where could we get those FLAs at for our, you said it's a motor schedule, or?
Yeah, you should already know what your motors are drawing, right? So that was like I think it was week 3 when we filled this out. So that was a long time ago. And then we also have it from, our power circuits, when we did those power circuit calculations. So yeah, you should have all of your motor FLA already available to you. But this machine and motor schedule, that's probably gonna be the best place to go look for all this information.
You know, for the, M1 and M2, you put the 50 feet, 50 feet, and it's all into one column. Is that just because you just wanted to make it simple, or will you have 50 feet for M1 too?
So the wire that we're trying to size goes from here to there, correct?
Yeah.
So I can't just say, oh, well, MCC 1, that's, how many amps does that draw, right? So like, our MCCs don't have a preset amperage that they're drawing, because everybody's is different, right? So what we have to do is we have to say, okay, well, this MCC, what all is fed out of it? What is being fed out of here? So our branch circuits, what's in red, coming out here to those motors, we have to say, okay, well, let's compile everything that's fed out of here. So that's gonna include all of your motors, receptacles, and then also our shop lights in this example. So we have to calculate, well, all of this stuff that we have in this MCC, what is that going to collectively draw? So that way we can size this main feeder, that guy, effectively. So as far as the distances go, we're not trying to size from here to here, or from here to there, or from here to there, right? Because all the wires that was in red, from there to there, there to there, there to there, that's already sized.
Yeah.
Right, that was all our branch circuit stuff. So our X and Y distance, I mean, yes, we're listing this stuff out, but it's just so we know what's being fed, the load that this is gonna draw. How many amps is this MCC going to have in total? So when we say X and Y, yeah, it is from here to there. And then we're listing all the equipment. So yes, they are going to share all of those same X and Ys.
Okay.
Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, appreciate it.
So everybody's good up until this point.
Sir.
Okay, so this is just kind of filling in already known information. From this point on, this is where we're going to follow our steps from the code book. So, step 1, it says we need to take 125% of our largest FLA. So looking here, between our 2 machines in this example, my M1 is obviously the larger 14 amps. But since I have 10 of those, am I going to upsize all 10 by 125%? Or am I only gonna take 1?
Just one, no, all 10, because why, no? Then why?
It should just be the 1, right? So, when we're looking at that 430.24, it just says 125% of the FLA rating of our highest rated motor. Doesn't say motors, right, or all of those. It just says motor, meaning singular, 1, right? So, what I like to do is we need one M1 to be our quote-unquote largest. So what I would recommend that you do is kind of come back over here to your quantity and say, okay, we're gonna kind of slash out that 10, and now we're gonna have 9 here on that line item. We're gonna create a new line item for another M1, and this is going to be our largest. So there's only gonna be a quantity of 1, still gonna share all the same X and Y and stuff. Its FLA table listed FLA is still 14 amps, but for step one here, our largest FLA times 125%, this is the only one that we're going to upsize. So when I do that, I get 17.5 amps. So 14 times that 125%, that gives us 17.5. So since this is the only one that we're doing, this is kind of step one here. All these other largest FLA times 125%, these are all not applicable. The only one it's applicable to is this new line item that we created down here, this M1, that's our largest.
Is there any way when you do the designing of this, would you want to, is there any way that you can do what you did with like the total foot FR, like where you just have one big box and then center that 7.5 amps, so you don't have to go down and put NA.
So if you do that, then how do I know which one is the
Oh,
largest?
yeah, that's true.
Right? So we have to keep this separated by line item,
Okay.
right? Because here we are specifically saying, no, this one right here, this is my largest times 125%. This isn't applicable, this isn't applicable, that's not applicable, and neither is that. Only this one, right? Because we're only taking that one motor. So we can't just merge and center that one, because then it's kind of like, well, which one is it?
Yeah.
Right? So that would be step one. Step two is we need to take the sum of all other FLAs. So these 9 other M1s and these 8 other M2s, they're all drawing current. So kind of going back to when y'all were in code class, when y'all talked about these steps 5s and step 6s, y'all probably had your feeder lines drawn up over here, and Mr. Dixon or whoever your code instructor was probably drew something to this effect. Y'all remember seeing this? And y'all would come over here and say, for example, if this was your M1, of course you would have 14 amps here, you'd have 14 amps here, 14 amps there, and if this was another M1, right, it'd kind of be the same thing, right? Because whenever we say an FLA, and just because these are 3-phase motors, we don't have to divide that by 3 or nothing like that. That FLA is per phase. So if I take an amp clamp on this M1 and I put it around A phase, I should measure 14 amps, or pretty close to it, right? Then move it over to B phase, I should measure 14 amps. Move it over to C phase, I should measure 14 amps, right? So it's the same across each one. So what we're doing is exactly what y'all did here in code. It's just rather than drawing this horrific and time-consuming drawing here, we're putting it in a table format. So this is where we're going to introduce our A, B, and C phases. Because whenever y'all were in code and y'all did draw this, remember when y'all were doing the feeders, you'd have to go, all right, well on my A phase I got 14 amps here, I got 14 amps there, and all your amperages. Y'all remember doing that? So we're going to essentially do the same thing, but like I said, we're not going to spend 4 hours drawing this out, because that would take forever in our project. So we can simply just go, all right, well I know all my machines in here, thankfully in my project, are all 3-phase, right? We don't have any 3-phase and then some single phase, they're all 3-phase, so they're all gonna look just like this. So I can say, all right, well I got 14 amps for my M1, and I got 9 of those on this first line item. So if I was to draw out 9 more motors, I couldn't sit there and total up, well, I got 14 here, another 14, that's 28, and then another 14, and so forth and so on. Or you can simply just go 14 amps times 9 motors, right? So if I did 14 times 9, that gives me 126 amps. So in total, on my feeder here, I'm gonna have, for M1, it's gonna draw collectively a total of 126 amps on A phase, 126 amps on B phase, and another 126 amps on C phase. Y'all understand? Yeah.
If you got multiple FLAs, you just use the biggest one to do that too, right?
No, I'm gonna talk about M5 later. But y'all understand why I did 14 times 9?
Yes.
Okay, so for M2, what am I gonna multiply together for this step 2 here?
7.6 times 8.
Very good. So, very same thing, we're gonna take 7.6 times that 8, just like y'all said, and that gives me 60.8 amps. So, again, gonna come over here to our phase columns, we're gonna have 60.8 amps on A phase, another 60.8 amps on B phase, and another 60.8 amps on C phase. And as far as this other line item down here for M1, if you remember, that was for our step 1. We had to upsize him by 125%. So rather than carrying 14 over, we're gonna carry over whatever this is here. So in this case, 17.5. So I'm gonna fill in 17.5 amps, and another 17.5 amps. Right? Because remember, at the end of all these 4 steps here, we have to total everything up. So we need to include this upsized 125% for this guy down here. So that kind of takes care of all of our other FLAs. So then we get to step 3, and it says we need to take 100% of our shock receptacle panels. Well, according to what we filled out so far, we said, well, the shop doesn't have an FLA. Well, it doesn't. So this is where we're gonna kind of have to go off on a little side quest here. But on our shop receptacle panel schedules, I'm gonna fill one out just real quick as an example, but you should already have these filled out from last week, right? So we got panel 1 in MCC1. We know it's voltage in there. We know it's 3 phases. Amp main is 100. Oops. So I'm just gonna make up some stuff. Oops. Again, you should already have all this filled out. I'm just gonna make up some numbers here. Let's see. Alright, so like I said, I've just kind of made this faux panel here for my example, but you should already have this information created, right? So this is just our shop receptacle panel. So we don't have any information off of this panel at this moment in time to kind of fill in our phase columns here. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to take the information that is given to us and we're gonna have to find that information, right? So this panel schedule gives us watts, right? And these receptacles have what voltage on them?
120.
120, right? Well, we have watts and now we have volts. So can't we calculate for current in some form or fashion? So y'all remember what that law is called?
Or watts.
Watt's law, there you go. Close. So that power triangle, or what I like to call PIVO, I know the O's missing, but close enough. But we're gonna have to figure out, okay, well, what's all of our wattage on A phase, what's all of our wattage on B phase, and what's all of our wattage on C phase? So, we're gonna pull up our corresponding panel schedule. So again, this is MCC1, I have shop receptacle panel 1. I'm gonna look at shop receptacle panel 1 panel schedule. So I'm gonna have to go line by line and get all of my total wattages. So, this first line item, that's A phase. So remember, we got breakers and circuits on both the left and right hand side. So looking here for A phase, I have 16 and 1600 watts. So I'm gonna add those two together. And I'm gonna go plus my next A phase. So you kind of 1, 2, skip a few. Here's my next A phase. If I notice here, it's got 800 and 800. So I'm gonna add that together. Plus my other A phase, which is down here, I have another 800 and 1600. So when I total all of that up, I come out to 7.2 kilowatts on A phase. So inside of this panel, I have a total of 7.2 kilowatts. I'm gonna do the same thing for B phase. So starting up here at the very top, here's my first B phase item. I got 16 and 1600 watts. Plus my next B phase, I have 16 and 400 watts. Plus my last B phase, which is 12 and 800 watts. So when I add those up, I also get 7.2 kilowatts. That's just pure luck right there, but y'all kind of see how we're doing this?
So my AC unit goes across all 3 phases, so it'd be just divided by 3.
Mhm. So help them out, guys. Where's your AC unit fed from?
It's from the office receptacle.
Yeah.
Right, so should we even be looking at the office stuff?
No.
No. Is the office receptacle panel listed on here?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Right? So we're only looking at this shop receptacle panel, and we'll also talk about the shop lighting panel, because I have this included in there. So you should not be looking at your office receptacle panel, right? It's just our shop receptacle panel number, whatever MCC you're in, right?
So all you did was just add the watts up for each phase?
Yep. That's all we're doing. Is the only thing you have to, like I said, keep in mind is we have circuits on both the left and the right hand side, right? So if you open up your panel at the house, you got breakers on both the left and right hand side. So we have to consider both of those sides there, right? But we're gonna go line by line and filter those out, kind of by A phase, B phase, and we're also gonna do C phase too, right? Y'all see what I'm doing here to get those values?
Does
Yeah.
that need to be on our sheet?
No, this will probably be on a scratch piece of paper.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I'll see some people, they'll kind of course, I'm zoomed in here so y'all can see, but sometimes I'll see some folks, they'll kind of do that over here off to the side. That's fine. You can leave it on there. It's not points off or points given or anything if you put all of that over here. But that's mostly what I see is somebody will typically add all that stuff over here off to the side on their panel schedule, and that's fine. But you technically don't have to show this right here. I'm just kind of showing y'all how to get this information, if that makes sense. Everybody's tracking though?
And then it's for every phase that's we would add for like all the A's, add them up.
Yep, all the A's, yep. So like I said, on my calculator, I'm just going line by line, and That first one, I add those two values, I go to the next one, I keep adding to that same one, so I add them all up to get those values. And like I said, I know I just made up these numbers, you're gonna have your actual numbers, but I'm just totaling up whatever I typed up, basically. So, but we got one more, we got C phase. And if you notice, kind of down here at the bottom that we just completed this B phase, but those shop receptacle panels, they can only hold 16 receptacle circuits, right? Naturally, this makes this panel imbalanced because it goes ABC, ABC, and then ends on AB, right? There is no C at the end. So it's naturally kind of imbalanced in that regard. So C phase is typically your least amount of wattage here, just because there's not enough slots. So if we look here, our first C phase item or line here, we have 1200 and 1200, plus our other C phase line, which is here, has 16 and 1600. So when I add all those up, I only get 5.6 kilowatts. So not all the time, but most of the time, that C phase column will be less than. And it'll cause that imbalance for us. Because so far, as far as our sheet over here, everything's been balanced, right? Because all we've been talking about were three-phase motors. So that's really nice because it does balance things out. But this shop receptacle panel comes in here, and that typically is what throws us off balance. Okay. But everybody understands on how to get those wattages from these panel schedules. Okay. So, now that we got our total wattages, we can't just plug wattages in here because we're talking about in terms of current, amps. So we have to convert that to amps. So, we said Watt's law, PVO, okay? So we said our receptacles are 120 volts. So if we took this 7.2 kilowatts divided by 120 volts, let's see here. That gives me exactly 60 amps. Spot on 60.
If we
But-
don't get, if we don't get an even number, do we round up or down?
Just standard rounding. I mean, 2 decimal places. Yeah. Now, one thing to consider though, we have to think about how these shop receptacles are fed. So if we kind of look at a one line, so to speak, actually. We have our MCC bus. Well, kind of when we did our conversation a couple weeks ago, we added our shop receptacle panel and what with it in the MCC elevation drawing.
The transformer.
That transformer, right? Because our MCC bus has what voltage on it?
480.
So this, exactly, very good. So this has 480, 277 on it. Well, we already said that our receptacle's got 120, so we needed to step that down. So as far as kind of a one line here, from here out, we had a transformer. This was that MCC transformer, and we actually sized this as a group, right? So I think we came up with what, a 30 kVA for everybody? So that was kind of a group activity that we did. But this this MCC transformer, this fed our shop receptacle panel. And then that panel, kind of like the MCC, it's just a organization tool to kind of keep all of our stuff organized. Then this kind of went out and fed our receptacles at 120 volts. But this panel was 208/120. So when we calculated this 60 amps right here, in terms of relativity to this transformer, is that technically primary or secondary current?
secondary.
This is secondary current on this transformer. It's over here on this side, right? Well, what we're sizing for this wire over here, this is coming in and feeding our transformer here, or at least our MCC, which feeds the primary side of this transformer. So does this 60 amps, does that really do us any good?
No?
No, right? Because that's not what this wire is basically going to be interfaced with. That's on the other side of this transformer. So y'all are in transformers class. Whenever I was in school many years ago, we called this the 100-year equation. I think they just simply call it the transformer equation now, or I guess is what they call it. But there's a 3-part little ratio here. Y'all remember what that is from transformers class?
So you just multiply it by the ratio of the transformer?
We're getting there. But what is this ratio? What's this law or rule that we have with transformers?
1 to 2, maybe?
Well, that is gonna be your turns ratio, but what are the values here? So I'll kind of help you out with that one. So you got your number of turns on the primary over the number of turns on your secondary is equal to what? What are the other two variables?
Average of primary and,
Voltage of primary.
So where do I put, so we'll do one at a time. We'll do current first, but where do I put current primary? On top or on bottom?
on top.
Really?
Okay, never mind on the bottom.
There you go. So you got IP on the bottom and IC, or IS, excuse me, on the top. And then the second one, I think you said it.
Your voltage primary,
And
your voltage secondary.
there you go. So this is, like I said, the transformer equation, or what I call it, the 100-year equation. It's well past 100 years old now, but this is the 100-year equation, right? So if we look here, we can determine that our number of turns and our volts, they're what's called directly proportional, right? You increase the number of turns, then you're gonna increase the number of volts, right? But current, that's the oddball. That is indirectly proportional. That's also kind of like looking at how sometimes I like to draw Watt's law. So if you kind of have a bar graph here, and let's just say this total bar graph here, that's your watts, right? If that's not changing, and you have, let's say, this many volts in this shaded area, that's volts. In this unshaded area, that's current. Well, if I increase my voltage to keep the same amount of wattage, well, to do that, current has to go down, right? To maintain that kind of equilibrium, if you will. So that's another way that I kind of like to look at that or show that. So that current is indirectly proportional. So we kind of know everything as far as what to fill in on this portion of our ratio. We don't necessarily care too much about the turns. We could calculate all that, but no sense in it. But we can fill this portion out here. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this ratio is this was made for phase values only. Phase values only. So you can't use line to line or phase to phase. That's the same thing as a line voltage, but it has to be from phase to ground. So when we kind of fill this in here, if we take our current secondary, which we just found, which was 60 amps here, we'll fill this in. So we'll do current secondary over current primary, that's what we're trying to find, IP, is equal to voltage on our primary, and again, this is voltage phase, so our primary side from phase to ground would be 277. That's on the primary. And then over our voltage on the secondary, which we already said was 120 volts. So we'll kind of set this up here. And so to solve for IP, you have to crisscross multiply. But if we kind of look on how this ends up, we end up with 277 times current on the primary is equal to 60 times 120. Anybody want to take a guess on what 60 times 120 is?
1,600.
No.
72, yeah.
7,200 watts, right? We already have that information, what the heck? So if we take 7.2 kilowatts, 'cause that's what that is, we ultimately end up dividing by 277, because this will cancel on that side. What the heck? So where I'm going with this is what's another law about transformers? Power in is equal to what?
Power out.
There you go. So if I got 7,200 watts on A phase on my secondary, the primary side is gonna have that same load too, right? Minus out any small little differences. It's gonna be basically the same. So instead of doing this long drug out way to figure out what our current on the primary side is, because again, that's what our main feeder is interfacing with, is the primary side of this transformer, we're gonna divide all our wattages here, not by 120, but by what?
Two
Oh,
of them.
no, that's our wattage.
Then,
272.
60 amps, or no?
277. So rather than divide by 120, we're gonna divide by 277. Is that because our receptacles have 277? No, but that's just the way our math is working out.
So we won't have to do all the other stuff if we divide that initially.
Yeah, because every single time you set up this 100-year equation, you're always gonna end up with 277 times current on the primary is equal to whatever your kilowatts are. Every time, every time. There's not gonna be a time that doesn't become true. So it always ultimately ends up to 7.2 divided, or your kilowatts divided by 277. And we can also say, we proved that mathematically, but we can also say power in equals power out, right? So we can almost kind of bypass that and say, well, maybe I'm not trying to find secondary current at all because it doesn't really matter to us. I just want the primary current, right? Does that make sense on why we're gonna do that? Everybody's good with that? Okay, so when we kind of look at this now, we do 7.2 kilowatts divided by 277 now. That now gets, I'm gonna call that 30 amps. It's 25.99, so we'll just say that's 30 amps. We now have 30 amps, and I'm gonna mark that as primary current. So we're gonna just, like I said, I kinda wanted to walk through this one on the first one, this kinda long way, so that we all understand why we divide by 277. So, but we're gonna divide all these wattages here by 277. So for B phase, same thing, we'll take 7.2 divided by 277 volts, which ironically A and B were the same in this example, but so we already know that that's gonna come out to 30 amps. And then for C phase, we'll take this 5,600 watts, divide it by 277 volts. And that gives me, we'll say 20.22. But everybody understands the how and the why we do this for our shop receptacles. Okay. So now that we've kind of looked at our panel schedule, we gathered up all of our wattages that each phase is going to be drawing, and now that we calculated for its currents, now we can take those primary currents and we can fill them in on our chart up here, because now we have usable and tangible data to plug into our table here. So, for A phase, for our shop receptacle panel, we calculated 30 amps, so I'm gonna fill that in here, 30 amps. B phase, it was the exact same thing, 30 amps, that just happened chance on that. And then C phase, we said was 20.22 amps. So that's our shop receptacle panel. So kind of going back here to our steps, Step 3, 100% of our shop receptacle panels, check. Right? So the last thing that we have is step 4, which is 125% of our shop lighting panel. So here a few weeks ago when we did our shop lights, did everybody put 12 shop lights in their shop? Everybody did that. Okay, good. Did everybody make 3 circuits of 4 lights in their shop? Did everybody do that? Nobody did anything different? Nobody tied all 12 or anything together?
No, sir.
Okay, great. So, with that, when you do this panel schedule, I'm not gonna make a new one for the shop lights. It would technically be the same thing, but there's a little bit of a shortcut. But when you did your panel schedule, remember this was the one that I said, your shop lights don't hopscotch across, right? I just said, just do A, B, and C. Whether it was all on the left or all on the right-hand side, it didn't matter, but for your shop lights, just put circuits 1, 2, and 3 on there, right? So when you do that, it becomes balanced. So if you were to hopscotch, you would have 2 circuits on A phase and only 1 on B and none on C. So we want it balanced. So if everybody made 3 circuits of 4 lights on their shop, well, we could do the same thing that we just did for our panel schedules, or a little bit easier route. We come over here to our shop lighting page. It does all the math for us right here. If you got 4 lights per circuit, that's 1,080 watts. The shop lights actually plug directly into the MCC bus. So they're already at 480, 270, or technically just 277 ground there, base to ground. But if we take 1,080 divided by 277, that gives us 3.9 amps, right? So we don't even have to do any math on that. The only thing we have to do is that 3.9 amps, that's at 100%. The code book says for our shop lights, we need to do 125%. So for our shop lights, all we have to do, and this can kind of be a group activity, but 3.9 amps times 1.25, 1.25, we get 4.88 amps. So that's our upsize 125%. So we'll say 4.8 amps. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. So, as far as our little sheet over here, check on step 4. So now that we did our 4 steps, we kind of filled in our largest FLA times 125% in our 3-phase columns here. Now we have to total everything up, right? So just kind of like when y'all were back in code class, you would have to come in and you'd have to total up everything on A phase, B phase, and C phase. We have to do the same thing. So underneath this, we're going to total everything in A phase column, everything in B phase column, and everything in our C phase column. So I'm going to do 126 plus 60.8 plus, I'm going to skip that 30, we got 4.8 plus 17.5 plus, and I'll put the 30 at the end, and that gives me 239.1 amps. And that's for A phase. If we look at B phase, since my shop receptacle panel had the exact same current here, that's the only thing that's going to make everything unbalanced. Since it had the exact same, I know that this total column here is going to come up to the exact same number. So 239.1 amps, and that's for B phase. And then lastly, we have C phase, which again, the only thing that's changing is the shop receptacle panel number, or should be changing. And that gives me 229.32 amps. And that's for C phase. So, just like when y'all were in code, and y'all totaled up how many amperages you had on your feeder over here, you picked the largest size feeder, right? And you sized all your other feeder wires to that largest one, right? So we want to pick the largest one, and then we'll size all the other ones to it. So when we look at our totals down here, in this case, A and B phase are the exact same. So it really doesn't matter which one of those that we pick. But if you had a outstanding higher number on one of them, you're going to pick that. But since we got A and B the exact same, I'll just pick A phase here and say that one's our largest. So we're going to take our largest phase, and then this is where we're going to apply our growth factor. So we totaled everything up. Now we have to apply the growth factor. So I'm going to take this 239.1, and I'm going to times it by 130%. So in our largest phase times our 130% growth factor, this can kind of be another merge and center here. Now, I'm going to show the math there just so you all have notes on it, but you don't have to show the math necessarily on your spreadsheet. You can just record the final answer. But when I do that calculation, I get 310.83 amps. So that's what you would want to record in this merge and center box. It's 310.83 amps. So as far as our little checklist over here, we applied the 130% growth factor, and now we have our required ampacity. So we've kind of satisfied all of these steps right here. So the rest of our columns, if y'all kind of remember, all the way back like in the second week, I was telling you all about wire sizing and how, ampacity, that's only one portion of wire sizing. And we're going to also factor in voltage drop in our project. There's some other things you have to consider too. But for in here, we're going to focus on ampacity and voltage drop. So everything that we did just now, that's kind of the ampacity portion of it. So now we know, hey, this feeder wire that we're running from this panel to this MCC, we're going to rate it for it to be at 310.83 amps. That's what we're going to size it to, at least. But now we have to figure out the voltage drop kind of side of things. So our voltage drop permitted column. This can also be another merge and center. But we need to figure out a couple of things. Well, one, what voltage is this main feeder having applied to it? So it's feeding the MCCs. So the MCCs have what voltage? 480. So there's not a transformer or anything in between here. So we can assume safely that what voltage is on this feeder wire? 480, right? So we have 480 volts. And again, I'm just kind of showing the math here. You don't have to include that. But per the code book, for feeder circuits, what allowable percentage for voltage drop is allowed on a feeder? So 3 was for branch circuits. That's total. 2. There you go, 2%, right? So we got 3 allocated for branch, 2 are for our feeders, in total 5%. So in total meaning from the very start of your system to the very last thing on your system, you can't have more than 5% throughout that entire process. So 480 volts times 2% this time gives y'all what? Y'all are gonna have to do that one on yourself. By yourself. 9.6, very good. So 9.6 volts, that's what we're going to record in this column here. So that is the maximum voltage that we can lose from this main distribution panel to our MCCs. That's the maximum. That's our threshold.
Is that kind of like a group activity one?
Yes, everybody will have that 9.6.
And that will be the same for every MCC, correct?
Yes. Each MCC is gonna be fed with 480 volts. So, when we go to our next column, that circular mills calculated, this is just like our power circuits. So I pulled up that voltage drop calculation worksheet. So there's our circular mills formula. Again, we're gonna kinda have to modify that a little bit. But we have our circular mills is equal to, again, that 2 is used for single phase circuits, so we're gonna have to swap it out with what?
Square root of 3.
Square root of 3, so we'll put square root of 3, or what's its numerical equivalent?
3.14.
That's pi.
1.7. Nah.
2, 3.
That's first part, 1.73,
2 or 3.
7.5.
3.
2.
8 or no?
Close, I mean, it kinda looks like an 8, somewhat.
6.
Okay, it's like hangman.
Yeah.
1.732, right? So if you're gonna get a tattoo, make sure that's what you get on there, 1.732. So that's the square root of 3. So that's its numerical equivalent. So we have that times our circle K. Again, that's an approximate value, but it's gonna be a constant for us. And that has to do with the circular ohms per foot, or the ohms per circular mill foot, excuse me. But for copper wire, that's gonna be 12.9, so that will be a constant for us. Times our distance, which that will be an actual number that we'll get, times our current. So our current is not gonna be what we totaled up down here, it's gonna be this growth factor applied to it. That's gonna be our current, right? And then all divided by our voltage drop permitted, which we just found was 9.6 volts. So that's kind of our new formula for these main feeders. Not much really changed other than just that voltage drop permitted. So if we kind of fill in our numbers here, we have square root of 3 times that 12.9 times our distance, which I just kind of made up of 140 foot, times our current of what we calculated was 310.83 amps. All divided by 9.6 volts. Don't forget parentheses when you do these calculations either. So, when I do that, I get 101 point, we'll just call that 28,000 circular mills.
Do you want our work shown on the?
You don't have to show it, I'm just showing it here so that way you kind of know what the process is.
Alright.
But as far as, and this could be another emergent center box here, but all you really have to record is that final calculation there. I'm just kind of showing you all the process there. And I'm gonna kind of move that wire size column because I didn't quite give myself enough space there, which is a try. Close enough. Alright. But that last column there, our wire size, we can't just put this circular mills, right? Because that's not a wire size that we understand and that we know. So do y'all remember how or where we go to translate this wire size? Y'all remember what table that is in the code book?
310, is it that?
No, not that table. That's close. That's a good guess though. No, it's table 8. That's all the way towards the back of the book, page 725. So we're gonna take this circular mill value and we're heading to table 8. Again, that's on page 725. So, when we look at table 8, there's that circular mill column, of course, but we need something that is equal to or greater than 101,280 circular mills. So what wire size do you come up with there? 15. What wire size y'all think we need? So we have 101, so if you have $101.28K dollars in your bank account, do you think $1,620?
250.
There you go, 1/0. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
So 1/0 is rated for 105.6 thousand circular mills. So I would agree with that one. 1/0 is what table 8 tells us. There you go, 1/0. Now, again, this circular mills calculation, this is just saying, hey, from this point all the way over here to your MCC, if you run a 1/0 conductor, you're not gonna lose more than 9.6 volts. That's all that calculation is telling us. So that's our least minimum wire size. But how many of y'all can rattle off what 1/0 can carry in terms of current?
1 million volts.
1 million volts? Maybe. But we're talking about in terms of current though. So we have to look that up. Now, one thing to remember, kind of going back to last week, when we did our conduit schedules, right? We kind of talked about that. That was over here. I told y'all our main feeders are not going to be encased in conduit. Y'all remember that from last week? So, if we go back to our traditional table that we're used to looking at amperage of, which is table 310.16, so go ahead and head over that direction, but that's on page 187. Page 187. If we look at table 310.16, the title of it says ampacities of insulated conductors with not more than 3 current carrying conductors in a raceway. A raceway is just a fancy way of saying a piece of conduit, right? So, again, kind of going back a little bit to your code, that conduit kind of acts like a jacket. That would just be like, right now, if you were wearing a Carhartt jacket, it kind of traps heat in there. So, these ampacities are kind of derated from that factor there. So our main feeder wires, they're not going to be encased in conduit. They're going to be encased in what's called a cable tray. So a cable tray in y'all's testing and maintenance lab, have y'all ever looked up in the ceiling cavity up there and y'all ever seen like those train track looking deals up there? That's a cable tray, and I think Mr. Delgado has quite a few cables kind of laying in there. So you just kind of lay the cables down, and most of the time you take some zip ties to kind of secure it to the little track there. So that's what we're using. So whenever we use a cable tray, that's just like if we were running wires outside on the poles and wires. It's what's considered free air, because it can breathe a lot more. It's not wearing that Carhartt jacket. It's not trapping that heat. So if it can cool off faster, just like a transformer, it can do more work, right? So instead of table 310.16, we're going to flip the page, and we're going to look at table 310.17. So we're going to take this 1/0 conductor here, and we're going to go to table 310.17. That's our free air conductor table. And now we have to look. So even though this is a main feeder, what wire insulation are we still using? It is stranded, but what's the insulation type? There you go, THHN, which falls underneath what degree column? 90 degrees. So make sure you're looking at the 90-degree column. Make sure you're looking on the left-hand side of that table for copper. But it functions just like table 310.16. So go down to 1/0, and how many amps can it handle? So 1/0 can handle 260 amps. But is that going to be good enough for what we need?
No.
No, we need something that can handle at least 310, almost 311 amps. So we can't use 1/0, but that's okay. You'll probably run into a situation like this. You can always increase your wire size at table 310.17. That's fine. So let's find a wire that can handle almost 311 amps. And what wire size do y'all pick?
4-aught.
You could use 4-aught, but 3-aught would be more accurate, right? Because it's rated for 350. So 3-aught is what I would pick. And that would be our final wire size that we picked there is 3-aught. And that's what we would record. And of course, this wire size here, that would also be a merge and center kind of box.
One.
And you would have 3-aught there, for example, or in this example. So again, whatever the wire size table 8 gives you, that's the bare minimum wire size you can pick. You can always size up at that point, because again, we kind of go back to our conversation that we had a number of weeks ago. If you increase the wire size, you increase your circular mills. That's like adding more lanes on the highway, right? So you should, in theory, at least on the highway theory, or example, you should have less traffic, right? Less voltage drop. So if you increase the wire, we don't have to go back and worry about voltage drop, because it's good. It's covered with that 1-aught. So since we're going bigger than 1-aught, that 3-aught, it's not going to lose not more than 9.6 volts permitted, and now we can carry our current.
It's a bit unrelated, but is ever making the wire too big detriment to it? Like it just can't carry current as well?
Some situations, yes. So out in the real world, we're not too worried about it in our project, but in the real world, yes, you do have to factor in what the actual wire size is on some things, because some pieces of equipment can only handle, certain up to a certain wire size on where you connect it to. That would be like us trying to take some 3-aught conductor and trying to use it on motor controls. Y'all remember those little? Did y'all have the terminals, or were y'all using the actual relays and stuff? Y'all wired up to the actual relay? Yeah, they changed that now. It's on term blocks now. But that would be like trying to take a 3-aught wire, which is a pretty good sized wire, and trying to put it on that little terminal on your control relay or contacts and motor controls. Like stuff like that, you do have to factor into. So that kind of also helps determine, hey, where should I put this, or maybe I need some other equipment. Some people, I'm not a big fan of them, but that's just because the utility wouldn't like it. But there's also what's called Polaris blocks. That's where you can bring in a larger wire, and then you can kind of downsize it from there, so you can fit it into a control relay or something like that. So, yeah.
Is there any loss on that box? Like if you take that wire size and you put it and you adapt it down, is there a loss of voltage or any current or anything like that?
I mean, yes, obviously. I mean, you're going from a big wire to a little strand, but the reality of it is, in situations like that, your little wire is only going a little bit of ways, right? So you mostly have that beefed up wire for voltage drop reasons. Another solution to that kind of stuff is, rather than running one big wire, you could take 2 smaller wires, run them in parallel, right? So that also helps with current too. So rather than, if you bought some million cable because that's how much wire you needed, or what wire size you needed for ampacity reasons, it's probably a lot cheaper if you buy a couple of 3-aught wires and put them in parallel, right, and run it instead. So it's all stuff that you just kind of have to factor and look at and evaluate if you're doing that kind of stuff. But does everybody understand how this is kind of working here? So this is not how that example project is laid out back there in the back. The main feeder stuff, that example project is probably not the best, but I'm kind of showing you how you need to do this. Like I said, there's multiple ways you can do this and kind of show this work, but in my opinion, I think this is probably one of the easiest, simplest ways. It breaks it out almost step by step, almost in kind of like chronological order of what you need to do and kind of fill out on here. So I feel like it's kind of the easiest thing to do. But like I said, you don't have to do it this way, but you at least need to cover all of this information that I have up here. You need to have this covered in some form or fashion. So everybody's good with the wire size? Okay. So a couple of things. One, I think Robert, earlier you mentioned something about your RM5s and our M6s. So I left those off on this example, but how you would do that, your M5, of course, we kind of remember our M5 has the 3 motors on there, right? So let's just say, for example, these are all 5 horsepower motors. So they're all gonna draw 7.6 amps. So again, I'm just kind of drawing that as a reference there. So for your M5, when you make a line item for that, you're still gonna list out however many M5s you got in your MCC. So let's just say you got 5 M5s in this MCC. It's still gonna share all the same X, Y, rise and fall, all that good stuff. But for your FLA, just like, pull that page up. Just like when we filled out M5 on this page, for your FLA, you're not just gonna list one, you're gonna list 3 FLAs. So you would have like 7.6, 7.6, and 7.6 amps here. Now, when we kind of look at our steps here, 125% of our largest FLA, that's what we're looking at, is FLA, not machines, right? So if we were including this M5 here, just because it has 3 motors, that doesn't mean I add all 3 of those up and that's my FLA for that M5. No, it's per motor. The motor has the FLA, not the machine, right? So when you're looking here, you would say, okay, my options for my largest FLA, I have 7.6, 7.6, 7.6, another 7.6, and 14 amps. Out of all those different FLAs, what's my largest? It's still 14, right? So you would still go about that process the same. I had 2 people that, because all these numbers that y'all get are RNG, but I had 2 people where they had something like a 20 horsepower motor on their M5, and that's whatever, I don't know, I'm just making up, but let's just say that's 30 amps. If that was the case, if that's your case where you would have that and say this was 30 there, for example, if you fall into that category, I can talk with you separately on how to do that. But most of y'all, that's not going to be a thing.
Mine is, yeah.
Oh, yours is that
My
way?
biggest motor is on my M5 or something.
Is it? Okay. Well, then I can talk with you later about how to navigate that. But for most people, that's not the situation that y'all have. So, kind of going back to our little example here, just all the 7.6. What you would do is, again, we're looking at individual motor sizes or FLA sizes there. So when you come over here to your phase columns, you're having to add all those other motors up. So at that point, yes, you could do 7.6 plus 7.6 plus 7.6 times whatever your quantity is, and then you could fill that number in over here on your phase columns. Does that make sense? That's the time that you can add them together. But, like I said, I guess I can get with you afterwards. You too? Dang. I'll have to look at that code then. Like I said, that's kind of RNG on there,
Yeah,
so
'cause
I guess y'all drew the short straws
I
on
got a
that.
25 horsepower on my M5 that has 34 amps.
Okay, yeah. I'll have to look at that code again.
So
I thought I'd fix that.
for mine, it's like 11, 14, 14. Is that detrimental? Like, is that gonna be
Is that your amperage on there?
yes, on the FLA?
It just depends on what else you have in your fabrication, right?
Yes.
So your M12, if I had to guess, at least is probably bigger than 11 or 14 amps,
Yes.
right? So that would be your largest. So
Okay.
you're kind of like what I was talking about here. So you would have, what you say, 11, 14, and 14?
Yes.
So you would have 11, 14, and 14. You would upsize your M12 or whatever's your largest. I'm assuming your M12 is the largest, but you would upsize that one. And then for this, whenever you get to your phase columns here, then you'll go 11 plus 14 plus 14 times 1 or 2, however many M5s you got in your deal, and then you can kind of fill that out across. But that's kinda how we would handle our M5s and also our M6s.
So you just add the total, FLAs together and then time by, however many motors you have, or-
And that's for your phase columns here, just for the phase columns.
but for the FLA column, you just leave it how it is, right?
Yeah, you need to have it separated out here to show that, yeah. Okay. Alright, so that was our multi-motor stuff. Like I said, that's for M5 and also that M6. Remember, M6 is the exact same thing, it's just, it's only 2 motors. So what we just covered here, as far as all of our calculations, we got 14 pages of calculations this week. This covers 6 out of those 14. So we have 6 pages that should look like this. The 7th one is gonna come from our office, which I'm gonna talk about that after. But since we're talking about MCC stuff, I'm gonna go ahead, and since this was the wire sizing, I'm now gonna talk about the breaker sizing for it. So in your code book, or on your notebook, directly after the wire sizing, you have main feeder short circuit protection. And there's a blank page there. So if we look at our steps again, whoops, on motor formula sheet here. So that was, what we just did was step 5. So if we look at step 6, this is talking about the breaker sizing. So it's gonna direct us to 430.62. So we'll go ahead and head that way, even though that's probably not what we're gonna look at. But let's go to page 352.
What's the article again?
430.62. Okay. So if you kind of scroll up a little bit in that text, we're now in part 5. So part 5 is our motor feeder short circuit and ground fault protection. So again, that's just a very long and kind of complex way of just saying fuse or breaker, right? Short circuit and ground fault protection, that's all it's talking about, fuse or breaker. So this is specifically a subsection in Article 430 that talks about feeders, breaker, or fuse sizes. And in our case, we're using breakers for our feeders. So if we look at 430.62, this is talking about a rating or setting for a motor load. Well, yes, we have motors, but we also have other stuff too, right? So 430.62 is probably not the best place for us to start. However, if we kind of go to the next code reference, 430.63, that one I think fits our description a little bit better. It says rating or setting for a motor load and other loads. That fits our description a lot better. So we're going to look at 430.63. So, these couple of code references we're going to look at, it doesn't necessarily kind of give us steps. So I'm going to kind of make our own steps just so it's a little bit simple or simpler for us to kind of understand and to look at it. So that says where a feeder supplies a motor load and other loads. So that's what we got, motor and other loads. The feeder protective device, so our breaker, shall have a rating not less than that required for the sum of our other loads plus the following. So what it's saying there is, hey, in our case, in layman's terms, our receptacle panel and our lighting panel, we have to factor that into this sizing, right? Because they're drawing current. Now, the thing about this is we kind of have to read a little bit between the lines, because it just says the sum of the other loads. So the other loads for us is our receptacle and our lighting panels. But did it really specify, well, if you got a continuous non-motor load or non-continuous non-motor, did it specify anything like that? No, right? So it didn't specify anything like that for us. It didn't say upsize our continuous load or nothing like that, no. So basically step 1 for us is we need to take 100% of our shop receptacle panel. And step 2 is we need to take 100% of our shop lighting panel. That's really our first 2 steps. Doesn't specifically say that, but it also does kind of at the same time. We just have to read between the lines there. But that's what it's saying in layman's terms in relation to our project. Is we're now going to take 100% of both the receptacle and the lighting panel. And then it said plus the following, and it kind of gives us some options here. And it says option 1, if you only have a single motor. Well, look in here, and when we did our wire sizing and what we have in our project, we're going to have more than one motor on our feeders. So that's not really an option for us. Option 2 says if you only have a single hermetically sealed refrigerant motor compressor. Well, none of our motors are that type of motor. So that's really not applicable to us. But then option 3 there, it says for 2 or more motors. That's what we have. We have 2 or more motors. We fall in that third category there. And that directs us to Article 430.62, ironically. So step 3 in this is we're going to go look at 430.62. So that's what this sheet up here kind of directed us to. But again, this is just kind of a general rule of thumb. This is not a end-all be-all sheet. So if we look at 430.62, again, it doesn't really break any steps out. It's just kind of one continuous paragraph. So we're going to kind of break it up just a little bit. But it says a feeder supplying a specific fixed motor load. So what that means is, like, for the most part, these M1s and M2s we're putting in here, those are fixed, meaning that we're going to keep those in there for a long time. We're not swapping those out every week or every day or every month because we're testing different motors or anything. No, we're putting this in with the intention of these are going to stay, right, until it craps out or whatever. Or maybe we might add another one, but it's staying. So, and it says, and consisting of conductor sizes in accordance with 430.24. Well, guess what? We just sized wire in accordance to 430.24. So we're on the right track here. But it says, shall be protected with a protective device having a rating or setting not greater than. So, kind of pausing right there, going back to your code class when they were telling you all branch circuits or branches on a tree grow which direction? Up. And feeders or roots on a tree grow which direction? Down. Where that little saying came from, of course, we looked at the branch circuits a couple weeks ago and saw where the up portion came from. This is where the down portion comes from, not greater than. So kind of keep that in mind, not greater than. So whatever we calculate here in a second, our breaker cannot be greater than that. And then it doesn't kind of start in a specific way, but this is really our first step here. It says not greater than, and then step 1 here is our largest rating or setting of the branch circuit, short circuit, ground fault protective device for any motor supplied by the feeder. So step or sub-step 1 here, I should rather say, is we're going to say largest branch OCPD, overcurrent protection device, and really that's like fuse size for our motor. That's really what that is, what that's talking about. That's our first step. So we need to pick the largest fuse size that's inside of this MCC. Shortly after that, it has some of that bracketed text. None of that is applicable to us. We can kind of skip over all of that bracketed text. So when you come out of that bracketed text, you're like on the second to last sentence there of that paragraph. And then it says, plus the sum of the FLA of all your other motors in the group. So that's kind of sub-step B here. Very similar. It's the sum of all of our other motor FLAs. Technically, that's where that paragraph ends. However, there's another little small paragraph kind of on the next column there. And it says where the rating, or where the same rating for setting of our branch circuit, short circuit, no current protection device is used on 2 or more of our branch circuits supplied by this feeder, then only one of those protective devices shall be considered for the largest above on the calculation. So very similar to kind of like what we did over here for our wire sizing. It's saying, hey, you might have multiple of these largest fuses, but you're only going to take one of those. So that's kind of all of our steps there. But remember, at the beginning, it said we needed to total all of this up. So we're going to add all this together. That's going to give us our total amperage here. And remember that feeders are roots on a tree grow down. So what we total up here, that cannot be greater than our breaker size. So we can represent that by kind of writing it like that. Now, one thing I see wrong all the time, and prime example is that example project back there, is we just read through everything that's required for our breaker sizing on our main feeders. Did it once say, hey, if you're using a fuse, you need to upsize it by 175%, or if you're using a breaker, you need to upsize it by 250? Did it once say that or mention that?
No.
No. Okay? That is probably the number one mistake I see on these breaker sizes for your main feeders. So, it doesn't say that. As much as that's ingrained in y'all's head, it does not say that. Where y'all get that from is if you turn back just a page, that table 430.52C1, that's where those percentages come from. So if you got, a fuse, that's 175%, or an inverse time circuit breaker, that's 250%. But if you look at that table, that is for maximum rating or setting of motor branch circuits. We're not dealing with branch circuits anymore, right? So that's probably the number one hiccup I see on this. So do not increase whatever you calculate by 250%. That's not the process here. So, is everybody good with my chicken scraps up here? I'm gonna erase most of it. Everybody's good? Got good notes? You good, Justin? Yes. Okay. So, I'm going back to our notebook here on this blank motor feeder short circuit protection page. We can kind of utilize a lot of the information and kind of a lot of the stuff that we just looked at for our wire size. Now, of course, I'm not going to redo all of this just to kind of squish it all together because I already got it laid out. But we can utilize a very similar setup. We still have to have an equipment ID column. We still have to have a quantity column. It's just no longer we need our X and Y stuff. We don't need distance. That's irrelevant to our breakers. We'll still need to know our FLA. But now we have a largest branch overcurrent protection column. We still got our phase columns, and then we have our breaker size column here. So, whoops. I'll take that in 5 more. So, we're still going to fill this out. This is normal. And now we're going to follow our steps. So, it said, step 1, 100% of our shop receptacle panels. Well, guess what? That's the exact same values that we just had from our wire sizing. So we can kind of leave those right where they're at. So step 1, done. Step 2, 100% of our shop lights. Well, we do have to kind of change that value because if you remember we had like 4.88 amps there. That was upsized 125%. So if we come back over here to our light in the shop, at 100%, those shop lights are only 3.9 amps. Small difference, but technically per the code, that's what it says to do. So for our shop lights, they're now 3.9 amps per phase. So that's kind of step 2. So kind of working on step 3 here, the first part we need to do is pick our largest branch overcurrent protection device. And again, that's the largest fuse size for any motor or machine on this MCC or on this feeder. So, again, y'all should have this information available to you via machine and motor schedule. But for me, I'm gonna have to calculate those real quick. There it is. So, and again, I'm gonna kind of write this in parentheses over here. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing this because it's the example. But my M1 will have a 25 amp trip, and my M2 should have a 15 amp trip. Again, you already have those values available to you from this sheet. But kind of following this step here, largest branch overcurrent protection device. We're looking between my M1s and my M2s. My M1 has a larger fuse size. So, just kind of like before, out of this 10 up on this first line item, I'm going to take 1 and I'm going to kind of put him down here by himself. He still has a 14 amp FLA, but for my largest branch overcurrent protection, I'm going to say, all right, well, I have 25 amp trip here. All these other ones, they're still NA. They're not applicable. We're not taking the largest fuse size for many of these. And as far as this first line item up here, just like what the code told us, we're not taking all 10 or all however many of their fuse size. We're only going to take 1 of their fuse size. So that's kind of that sub-step A there. That's our largest fuse. Sub-step B, sum of all our other FLAs. Well, that's kind of our phase columns here. So that's still at 14 times 9, 7.6 times 8. So we already had all that filled out. So to kind of add all this stuff together, we're going to take this 25 amps and we're going to put it across here. So we'll have 25 amp trip, 25 amp trip, and 25 amp trip. Okay. Is everybody tracking so far? Okay. So, once we kind of got a lot of this information, which again, a lot of this should carry over, next what we have to do is we have to total everything up. So just like before, we're gonna come over here and we're gonna total up A, B, and C phase. So just like before, we'll do 126 plus 60.8 plus, let's skip over that 30, 3.9 plus 25 plus 30. And that gives me for A phase 245.7 amps. B phase is the exact same numbers, so we know that it's going to be the exact same as A phase. So that's 245.7 amps. Again, that was just kind of luck that worked out there. And then C phase, that one's going to be different. 122, and I get a total of 235.92 amps for C phase. So just like before, we're going to pick the largest phase. In this case, A and B are kind of tied, so it doesn't matter which one you pick. But since I picked A phase earlier, I'll pick A phase again. But we need a breaker that is not greater than 245.7 amps. So we're going to determine that by going to table 240.6a. And that's on page 124. So if y'all turn to that page, again, we can't have a breaker greater than 245.7 amps, but what size breaker would y'all pick in this situation? What'd you say?
Say 225.
What'd you say? I would go with the 225, right? So looking at our deal here, oops, forgot to do that, but we totaled up our amps here. But our total amperage cannot be greater than this breaker size, right? So that we cannot go up above whatever we calculate. We have to be below. So those feeders or roots on a tree grow down. So you hit the size down. So that 225 is what I land at. So that would tell us a 225 amp breaker. And of course, our breaker size here, this is another box, merge and center kind of thing. But that would give us a 225 amp breaker.
How many pages did you say of this one?
So, since we're talking about MCCs, this will occupy another 6 pages, right? So you'll have 1 page for each MCC. So in total, you'll have 6 pages for the MCC wire sizing, another 6 here, so that's 12 out of the 14 calculations for this week. So does everybody understand on how to get the breaker size? It's a lot easier once we got the wire sizing set up, right? Kind of flows a little bit better. And like I said, kind of how I set up that wire sizing page, excuse me, you can take a lot of that information, kind of carry it over to this, kind of modify it just a little bit, kind of chop out some of those columns, rename a column or two, boom. Now you got your sheet for this, right? And a lot of the values, you can kind of carry those over too. Like a lot of those phase values, you can kind of carry over a lot of those. The only thing that will get a little tricky on this is those M5s, right? Your M5s probably will have, especially if you kind of have like some larger motors. David, I think you were saying like you had like 11, 14, 14. Yeah, you probably might have a larger fuse size on your M5s than maybe your M12. So that's something to also kind of keep in mind, is because now we're looking at the largest fuse size.
Yep. So
now that M5 or even like those M6s could actually play a factor to that, and that be your largest, not your M1 or M12 or something like that.
Yes, sir.
So kind of keep that in mind when y'all are looking at it. But you just kind of have to look at those numbers. And like I said, like I said, this page right here, this is probably gonna be your best friend, because it has all of this information that we're talking about, just kind of right there. You don't have to flip through all different pages trying to find the FLA or fuse size, or it's all right here. So, like I said, this is gonna be kind of handy, especially if you got like your, fabrication folks, you got everything in there. You probably wanna be kind of cross-referencing this page quite a bit. Production, it's good to use too, so. But everybody's good with this. And I just want to kind of cover real quick too. This makes sense. So in this example scenario we got going on here, we just calculated a 225 amp breaker. And this is again kind of going out over here to this MCC. But we just also calculated a 3/0 wire that was rated at 350 amps. Does that look okay to y'all?
No, it's gonna be tripping, right?
Is
It's
it?
because the wire size is rated for that, it's running at that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we want, right? So, again, kind of reinforcing one of the biggest mistakes that I see is taking this number right here and upsizing it by 250%. So hypothetically, let's play that out. So if we took this here, this 245, times it by 250, that gives us 614.25 amps if we upsize that by 250%. And then if we pick a breaker size off of that, even if we size down, that would be a 600 amp breaker. So hypothetically, I'll draw that in a different color. But hypothetically, if you were to do this the wrong way, you would end up with a 600 amp breaker here now. Would that make some of y'all feel better?
No.
It wouldn't make me feel better. I'd lose sleep at night. Why? All right, well, let's look at your testing and maintenance class, right? Y'all are testing breakers. I know at this point y'all have at least done the little single phase current injection. Have y'all used the PI 1600 yet? That big like 3-stack box with
Oh,
the two
yeah.
stabs. Have y'all used that?
Yes, sir.
So y'all are testing some pretty big breakers on there, and you're testing 300% more than what that breaker's rated for according to its little trip unit settings, right? Do those breakers, when you put 300% more current on there, do they just trip like that?
Not really, no.
No, right? Because you're looking at those time over current charts, right? Those pesky things that are hard to read because they're all whatever right there, right? So those time over current charts. So that breaker is going to trip, whether it's, whatever its time is. Let's just say between 12 and 17 seconds, for example, it's going to trip at 300% more, right? Well, 300% more of this current is way more than what this piece of wire can handle for that duration. So if you do size that up like this, which is wrong, what's in red there, if you do upsize that, which is wrong because the code book does not mention that anywhere here, but if you do that and say you do have a fault somewhere in here and you start drawing 300% more, for example, that breaker is not going to trip instantaneously. It's going to take a minute. And that's considering if the breaker's at full operation, right? How do we know for sure if the breaker isn't malfunctioning, right? Or maybe caught some soot on there or something. I don't know. But the point is that this wire is not rated for that current at all. I mean, it can withstand more than 350 amps, but not for very long, right? So your shop, the main feeder wires, all that will melt down, your shop will be on fire and burnt to the ground before that breaker even trips. Which, again, if we kind of look at who publishes this? National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA. The whole reason to prevent this kind of stuff from happening, right? So, whenever, like I said, don't do what's up there in red. That's wrong. No. But if we kind of go back to looking at the situation that's right, now we got our breaker sized at 225, our wires at 350. okay, I mean, yeah, even if this breaker does start seeing 300% more, it's probably not good for the wire, and the wire can't handle it for that long, but it can withhold it for a little bit, but hopefully, since this is also a smaller breaker, it should trip a little faster, right? So hopefully, that's as far as if we were to put, you know, the same amount of current of whatever 3 times 600% was, or 600 amps was, if we put 3 times the amount of that current, this one should theoretically trip faster than a 600 amp trip. So, the wire should hopefully kind of hold out in that aspect. But it's good to have your wire rated for more than what your breaker is. It's good for that. That's what you want to see. You don't ever want to see the opposite. You don't ever want your breaker to be handling more current than your wire. That's bad. That's no-no. But this, that checks out. That's good. Okay. So everybody's good with the MCC breakers? Okay. Everybody's good with my little chicken scratch up here? Okay. Okay. So far, we talked about the wire going from the MDP to the MCC and how to size those two, and also the breaker in there. We've sized those. So that right there, like I said, kind of occupies a total of 12 out of the 14 calculations for this week. The breakers are 6, the wires are also 6, a total of 12. The last 2 come from our office transformer. We have to size the wire from the main distribution panel to our office transformer, and we also have to size a breaker for it. But this is a little bit different scenario. It's kind of like apples and oranges. So MCC's heavy machinery load, motor load, right? Office transformer, this is mostly receptacles and lights, but this is a transformer feeder, basically, that we're solving for. So, kind of going back to some main feeder wire size, and we have to do one for the office transformer. So, I kind of redrew what we had up there for the most part. The office transformer is easier. So again, you can kind of,
Is there a page on the notebook?
so both the wire size and the breaker for this office transformer that we're gonna talk about, both fall underneath those main feeder sections. So for your main feeder wire sizing, you'll include this one for the office in there, and for the main feeder short circuit protection, you'll include the breaker in there. So, they should not go underneath that office transformer sizing stuff. That was just to determine the transformer size. These are main feeders, they're underneath those main feeder categories. But again, you can kind of use that base mold of what we just looked at for our main feeder wire sizing here. If you notice, we still have an equipment ID column. We still got quantity, X, Y, rise and fall, total footage. Where it changes is we no longer have an FLA, transformers don't have an FLA, or the largest FLA times 125%, or our phase columns, because that's all kind of irrelevant with this transformer. Instead, we just have a load section here, and a load times 130% growth factor, then our same last three columns, voltage drop, circular mills, and wire size. So, a lot's not gonna change here. This will be a really simple page. So for your equipment ID, you're gonna list out your transformer. I'm gonna use an example of a 500 kVA transformer because nobody should have a 500 kVA transformer that they calculated for their office transformer. If you did, might wanna look at your numbers again. But let's just say, like I said, I'm gonna do a 500 kVA.
Dang it, I don't even get to see it.
Nope, not on this one. Well, because not everybody gets the same transformer size. So I don't want to use an actual transformer size and give it to some folks but not others. So I'm doing something that nobody has. So, but we only got one of those. Your X, Y, rise and fall. Again, I'm just going to kind of make up some values. I'm going to show you where to get those at the end here in a little bit. The rise and fall, that's still 40 foot for our feeders. So that's not changing. Our total footage, right, still 140 foot in this example. Now, where things change up, I'm not gonna make you go through your ORP panel and total up all your A phase wattage, your B phase, C phase, same thing in the lighting panel. I'm not gonna make you do all that, okay? Simply, what we're going to do is we're going to size this wire based off of the transformer rated current on what it can handle. So it makes things a lot easier for us. So, for our load calculation here, we're going to use our three-phase equations. So we got that power three-phase is equal to our square root of 3 times V line times I line times that cosine of theta. So we can use this in a balanced system, right? Which we're gonna say for all project purposes, that transform is balanced. So, if y'all recall, when we kind of look at this, power is expressed in what units?
Watts.
Watts. So we got kilowatts, or what I call kilowatts, or watts, same thing, is equal to, and we're taking volts and amps and putting them together, so what does that give you, this portion here? Voltage, right? So you get kVA here, times, and then this last portion, cosine of theta, what is that? What does that calculate for you?
The power factor?
Power factor. Very good. So again, I like these formulas because it simply breaks down to kilowatts is equal to kVA times power factor. That is a true statement. So for our project, power factor is what value?
0. Or 100%, sorry.
There you go. And what do we call that 100%? We got a special name for it. Unity. So with power factor at unity, which is 1.0 or 100%, same thing, This, we can mathematically prove that KVA and kilowatts are the same thing, correct? Right? We can mathematically prove that. When you have a 100% power factor, they're the same thing. Because again, that power triangle, that they're laying right on top of each other there. So, we can kind of use that formula and mathematically say, okay, well with that 100% power factor, we can kind of substitute in our KVA of our transformer and for our kilowatts. We can kind of do that because they're the same values. So we can simply just plug in our numbers and say, all right, well 500 or whatever transformer size you calculated for the office, 500 kVA for my example is equal to our square root of 3, well, voltage in my line, all of our main feeders here have what voltage on them? Phase to phase.
277.
That's phase to ground.
480.
There you go. So from phase to phase, or our line, so phase to phase and line are the same thing. But our line voltage is 480 volts. And then we're solving for our current in the line. That's what we're looking for. So we can simply divide both sides by the square root of 3 times 480 volts. Don't forget parentheses there. Those will cancel out on this side. And you're left with 500 divided by square root of 3 times 480, or whatever kVA divided by that. So, in my example here, and again, this is going to be egregious because we're doing such a large transformer here. But I calculate current in my line will be 601 point, we'll call that 41 amps. So that would be your load.
And the equation would be 500 kVA times, I confused a little bit.
Are you confused on how I wrote this up here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my shorthand, so I'll explain this real quick. So when y'all were in high school or whatever, I'm gonna rewrite this, but okay, so there's the original formula, right? Kind of going back to some basic algebra. When y'all were in algebra, they would show divided by to get I line by itself. They would show that, right? Is that what y'all are used to? And then y'all would go, oh, these cancel out with each other, right? And left with all that. So rather than writing the same thing twice, you're
Well, yeah,
dividing
I
both
see.
sides
Okay.
by the same thing. So I just draw one line and I write it once, and I know just basic algebra principles that, hey, this side's canceling out. I'm just left with the I line over here, but I still have on this side 500 divided by that. So this is still equal to that. It's just like shorthand writing for me. So saves me a little bit of time. I don't know how many minutes of my life I've gained from doing that, but I'm sure it's substantial if you add it up over time. Does that kind of help? What do you mean?
Where did you source it from? Or did you just?
Well, that's what we're solving for, is the
Oh,
I
that's what
line.
you're solving for, okay.
Yeah, and that's just coming from that three-phase equation here.
Okay.
Yeah. So, once you solve for your load, I line, after that, it's the exact same process of what we did for the MCC main feeders. You're gonna take this, and you're gonna multiply it by 130% growth factor. Right, whatever, get however many amps there. Your voltage drop, this is still a feeder, so this is still 9.6 volts. Your circular mill's calculated, it's the exact same formula that we did for the MCCs. It's just now, you're gonna fill in this number in that equation, right? And then you get that number, you're still gonna go to table 8, and then cross-reference that with table 310.17, and pick a wire size. It's the exact same process after that. The only thing that changes is how we get our load. That's it. it should be easier on that. Does that make sense for our office transformer? So it's basically the exact same thing for the wire size. Now, it is a little different on the breaker size. So, because when we look at Article 430, that is for motor circuit conductors, right? This is not a motor circuit anymore. This is a office transformer. So, by the way, that was the 13th page. But for our office breaker, we're gonna have to size that one a little different. So we're gonna have to go to Article 450 this time. So that starts on page 373. Page 373. And Article 450 is for transformers, and that's what we're supplying here, is a transformer. So if we look here, 450.3, it talks about overcurrent protection. Perfect, that's what we need. So 450.3. And if we read that, it says, overcurrent protection of a transformer shall comply with either 450.3A, B, or C, depending on what we have. So it says, as used in this subsection, the word transformer shall mean a transformer or a polyphase bank of two or more single-phase transformers operating as a unit. Cool. So if we look at option A, it says transformers over 1,000 volts nominal. Well, do y'all know what the word nominal means?
When it's operating normally?
Very good, normally, right? So nominal looks a lot like and sounds a lot like normal, and that's all that it means. It's just a fancy way of saying normal. Why they just don't say normally, I don't know. They say nominal, but that's all that means is normal. So when we read this, that option A really translates to transformers that are operating at 1,000 volts or more normally, under normal conditions. So if we look at our office transformer, we know on the secondary side over here on our panels, we got the 208, 120 for in our office. But then on our primary, you said was what on this feeder? 480. What?
277?
There you go, 277. So, also something else with nominal voltages, it doesn't care if it's on primary or secondary. It doesn't care which one, because you have step up and you got step down transformers, right? So, nominal, it's looking at both sides. Does either side see over 1,000 volts? Well, is that true for our office transformer? No, it does not see over 1,000 volts nominally or normally. So option A is not a good fit for us. Option B though, it says transformers 1,000 volts nominal or less. Does that fit our description of our office transformer?
Yes.
Yes. So let's look at 450.3B as in Bravo. So if we read that, it says overcurrent protection shall be provided in accordance with table 450.3B, unless your transformer is installed in a motor control circuit, which that's not what our transformer in the office is being used for. So we flip the page once, we'll arrive at table 450.3B. Reconvene. So not a very big table, pretty simple. But it says maximum rating or setting of overcurrent protection for transformers 1,000 volts and less, and then in parentheses, that's the kicker right there. It says as a percentage of our transformer rated current. So when we just talked about the wire sizing for this load right here, this calculation that we did, this I line, this is your transformer rated current. That's what the transformer is rated to handle. because again, we did this calculation assuming it was all balanced. So this is our transformer rated current. So you already have that information available to you at this point. But if we look at our table here, the first column it says protection method, and then the second column is primary protection, and then the third column is secondary protection. So we look at our two options there. We got primary only, or we can do primary and secondary. Well, we are only going to have a primary protection breaker here. We're not going to have one on the secondary. The reason for that, my justification, is that both of these panels are going to have a big breaker up at the top center. So I don't see a means for us to have a secondary breaker. So we should only just do primary, in my opinion. And that's what we're going to do. So we're only looking at the little top half of that table there. So we're looking at primary protection. And there's three sub-columns. You got currents of 9 amps or more, currents less than 9 amps, or currents less than 2 amps. Well, even though you may not have had a 500 kVA transformer, I can guarantee you, if you size your transformer correctly in here, or matter of fact, if you picked any transformer size that I listed up there, you're going to have more than 9 amps of current. Okay, so that's always going to give us 125%. So we would simply take our 601.4 amps